About a week ago, yeah, it's a week ago today, the Honourable Simon Watts, who's the Minister, and the Honourable Shane Jones, both the Ministers in the Coalition Government. I think Simon Watts is the Energy Minister from memory and Shane Jones is the Associate Energy Minister, appointed a group of people, experts, they said, to be chosen for an electricity market review. Now, I've got to be honest with you, I've read the press release that's accompanied this a week ago, and I'm about as confident that this review will achieve anything in this area as I am of the Palmerston North District Court finally according some degree of respect to victims and their families in the case of the drug-addled gang member, who, by the way, has also got name suppression at the moment. So I'm particularly because I see a word in there that says we expect to see, the two ministers said last week, market-led approaches to energy security during the transition. As the economy electrifies, we work to double New Zealand's renewable electricity generation. I'm thinking to myself, mate, if market-led approaches were working, we wouldn't have had what we had last year and the government having to intervene and asking people to do things. Joining us to talk about that is the news editor of Business Desk. We've had him on before, energy correspondent and an expert in this particular field, Ian Llewellyn. And he joins us now. Ian, welcome to the show. Lovely to have you on. Thank you for joining us again.
Nice to see you, Michael. I hope you're well.
Listen, my scepticism, is it well placed or am I just being too sceptical?
Your scepticism is shared by many. There's ongoing debates about the market structure and whether it's delivering as it should do at the moment. As you said, we're going into this winter with very similar circumstances to last winter.
Mm.
Politicians are terrified of blackouts. There is nothing more scary to a politician than trying to explain why the power has gone out. And people in New Zealand are not used to it for the last 20 years. For all the failings in the market that you're seeing now, for the last 20 years, we have not got used to blackouts. We expect the electricity system to deliver. At the moment, we're going through a fuel problem. The review, in particular, is interesting. Not so much of what they might come up with. I'm sure they'll come up with similar solutions to what people have suggested in the past, but it'll come out in June. And at that point, we'll have a very clear picture of what's happened. For instance, the lakes could fill, and we could all go away, and you won't call me for another 2 years. But if the review will come out in June, if things are going bad, the review will be an excuse for politicians to be seen to be doing something.
Well, I'm looking, for example, Eric Frickberg, editorially produced the show this week, and he sent me a release from Meridian. It's their monthly operating report from January. I'm sure you've seen it as well. It came out 4 days ago. And in that, it notes already that the national hydro storage has decreased from 114% to 91% of the historical average, so we're behind the 8 ball already. And that South Island storage has decreased to 88% of the average in particular. And there is a suggestion it's getting dry. In fact, January 2025 was the second driest January on record, and now they're worried about that extending, obviously, further on. We've had a very dry, I have to say, February up until now as well. If we do repeat the climatic conditions of last year, Ian, does this make inevitable the same responses as last year as well?
Things are slightly different. We still have the same problems with gas supply, but last year everyone was taken very much by surprise about how fast gas dwindled. This year they're aware of it, so they've put in some precautions. So we don't have the gas backup, and you've got to remember that the hydro lakes are quite shallow. If you ran the electricity system just on the hydro lakes and nothing else, which is not true, but just to give an example, it would last 6 weeks. So we have to back it up with gas, wind, geothermal. That's another thing that's changed. We have a new geothermal station producing more base load, so that's a new addition to the system. And also the gentailers, by that I mean the 4 big generator retailers, have banded together to keep Huntly operating, and that means coal. It's quite funny in the press release about that they didn't mention the word coal once.
No, you're right.
it's such a dirty word.
Yeah, yeah.
Genesis put out a release yesterday saying, look, we've taken the hit. We've imported, I think it was 500,000 megatons of coal. So it's there, and we might have to take the hit because because the thing for Genesis is, if it pours down with rain and they paid for all that coal, they got to take the hit because it doesn't get used.
Mm.
So that's the dilemma that they have. So now the big gentailers are trying to work out, which is very unusual. They're four competitors getting together to work out how to keep the Huntley station generating in the future, and whether that will include this winter is yet to be seen. We've got to see what they come up with, but basically helping to pay Genesis to keep the place running.
Yes, so you're saying that Genesis, you're right, I think it's 1 million tons of coal that they can potentially build. 1 million tons? Yeah, that's right. Or you call them
Yeah, so
megatons, do you?
yeah, it's a big pile, a huge pile. Let's call it
Yeah.
a huge pile.
Okay, and so that they've got that. But you're right. The big power generators, who, as I understand, Genesis, Contact, Meridian, Mercury, are cooperating on the Huntley, coal power station. What is that? When they talk about, although it's talk about cooperation, what do you mean by that? Because it's owned by Genesis, they've done it. Presumably, it's to cover that. Does that mean the other three can come and say, "Can you augment our supply at some stage"? Is that how it works?
Yeah, but basically they're saying it's Genesis saying it's unfair for us to bear the cost and the
Oh, I
risk.
see what you're saying. Yep,
So
yep.
therefore, what you guys should do is you should help us pay for that coal, even if we don't use it, and you guys should help us pay to keeping the. They're big units and they're old units. They need maintenance. They need expenses on it. They take ages to fire up, so that they're expensive just sitting there. So they're saying you guys should help us. And
Okay.
what they're saying now is because the threat of political regulation is so large in their minds, in my cynical view, that they're now finding ways to solve that problem.
So the real reason they're cooperating and they didn't cooperate last year, you're saying, is because they are fearful of what the government this government stepping in and creating some sort of regulatory environment for them. Is that what you're talking about, Ian?
Yeah, so it's probably a bit of a cynical view. That I'm sure they got one eye on that. But the other thing is, people don't like them, but they they're professionals. Their job is to keep the lights on, and they're recognizing that they have to keep the lights on, and so they have to sort of move away from what they've done in the past. When I was talking to the Contact boss yesterday, I put it to him as this is a sign of market failure. You guys are getting together, and
Mm.
he put the argument: it's a sign of the market working because we recognise there's a problem. And the market working is not all about profit and gain. It's also about the market ensuring that the lights stay on. So it depends on how cynical you are, I guess.
Yeah, I
People
guess
feel
it does, and I'm sorry, but I'm in the cynical side on this too with you on that one. I think, Ian, we're in the same boat. I note also in the press release that came out of Simon Watson, Shane Jones last week that this is what they said, and I thought it was very interesting. This review will help ensure our regulatory settings can deliver on the long-term interests of consumers. Well, you don't have to read that as anything other than a threat at the end of the day. But also keep prices down for Kiwis and keep the lights on. Now, those are two big calls, I would have thought. It's one thing to keep the lights on to make sure we don't have the blackouts that you're talking about, but also keeping the prices down, because that's where the rubber hit the road last year, particularly in spot prices, but is also still hitting the road in terms of domestic electricity prices for this coming year. Is there anything really that the government can do to keep prices down for Kiwis?
Well, there are various interventions. Whether those interventions would have negative side effects and cause more problems is the debate.